Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Ring.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Shah. Good morning, good morning. Good morning, Jay. Good morning.
Good
Thank you.
morning.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. Nice to see you all.
So we will start the thing. I'll just ask Vinita join in. Dr. Vinita is just joining. She said she had some issue. She had joined earlier, but she said, I'll just log in again.
She's there now.
I'm
So I
so
found her.
sorry.
Good morning,
Yeah.
Dr. Vinita.
Hello everyone. I'm so
Hello.
sorry the connection
Good morning, ma'am.
went off.
So we start, Rashmi,
Yes, please.
with the proceeding.
I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. Sharing smiles and hope can make a good day. Good morning, everyone. I, Rita Singh, on behalf of Samvedana, the Gender Sensitization Forum of Shri Aurobindo College, wholeheartedly welcome you all to today's webinar on the topic Sexual Harassment Know Your Rights. Goddess Saraswati symbolizes knowledge and learning. To pay obeisance to the goddess, I would request the technical team to kindly play the Saraswati Vanna.
या वीणा वरदानी
Thank you, technical team. Samvedna, the Gender Sensitization Forum of Shri Aurobindo College, was established in the year 2016 in keeping with the UGC guidelines to provide equal status and opportunities to all the genders and make them aware of their rights. Since then, there was no looking back. Samvedna fulfills the requirement to achieve gender equality and has achieved many milestones. At this outset, we would like to present a short video culminating the session of 2020 to 21 of Samvedna. I would request the technical team to kindly play the video.
Initiative taken by UGC. Samvedna was established in November 2016, driven by the mission to see a gender-sensitive society devoid of any prejudices and discrimination, where both opportunities and responsibilities are equally shared by all the genders. Samvedna has flourished in the session of 2020-21 as it paraded and participated in events, reinforcing the idea of acceptance and equality of all genders. A social media campaign entitled Thought Bank, Put Your Two Cents In, was initiated in order to gain the perspectives of the youth on pressing topics. We received numerous entries wherein the students voiced their opinions about the same. Samvedna proudly announced the launch of Langni app, the monthly newsletter cum journal. We organized the second edition of our flagship event Prism 2.0. The flagship event encompassed 5 different types of competitions which received registrations from students across India. In collaboration with PAKI, the Women Empowerment Cell, and with the Indian Society of Colposcopy and Cervical Pathology, we presented a webinar on a guide to women's health. The webinar was packed with some of the most proficient female medical practitioners and gynecologists who made the audience aware about the myths and better practices revolving around menstruation and cancer screening in India. We have taken the aid of social media to promulgate the ideals of inclusive society and have been working coherently to achieve the same by the means of attractive posts pertaining to gender sensitization. Samvedna is grateful to our Principal Professor Vipin Kumar Agarwal for his motivating demeanor and support. Words can't suffice the contribution of our society convener, Dr. Rashmi Mathur, and our faculty coordinators, Dr. Vandana Bhalla, Mrs. Shobhana Chandra, Dr. Anita Kumari, and Dr. Isha Gunwal for their valuable contribution, guidance, and encouragement in all our efforts. The active role played by the student coordinators working with exemplary team spirit has led to the resounding success for the session of 2020-21. Ending on a note, Samvedna, the Gender Sensitization Forum, treasures all of its members and it's obliged to them for their diligent support all throughout. Thank you.
Thank you, technical team. We are fortunate to have our principal, Professor Vipin Kumar Agarwal, amongst us on this great day. Now I request our Honorable Principal, sir, to address the gathering and give his valuable inputs. Over to you, sir. Sir, you are on mute.
Sir, you are muted.
Sorry, my apology. So good morning to all the participants. My special good morning to Dr. Vanita Chandra, the resource person of today's webinar. And my thanks are due to Samvedna and its organizing team, led by Dr. Rashmi Mathur, Dr. Shobhana, Dr. Vandana, Dr. Anita, and Dr. Isha. And all the student coordinators, Ria, Shakshi, Rudrani, for organizing this webinar on a very sensitive and very pertinent issue. This fine rainy day, we are organizing this talk, and especially at the start of this academic calendar, that from tomorrow onwards, university is starting its new academic calendar. So this, before one day of this, or this organizing this webinar is of special significance. I'm sure as far as the legal issues are concerned, Dr. Vanita will be speaking on that. Just as a common man of India, as a vigilant citizen of this country, I can talk a few things that unless you have a congenial environment at workplace, the women workforce will not come in to the picture. Unfortunately, what is happening in the last 10 years in India, that the participation of women workforce in the total workforce of this country is falling. And in 1990, as per the World Bank report, this participation of women workforce in the total workforce was around 30%, 30 point some percent. And today it is 20%. It is not a very good sign. And one of the reason maybe, there is no research on it, but one of the reason may be that woman doesn't find the congenial atmosphere at workplace, and that they're afraid of coming out of their home, not in metropolitan cities, but especially in the rural, the small cities, and in these type of cities, they are not coming forward. And this is not a very good sign. If you want to make our economy a $5 trillion economy, which our government is committed to, then the woman participation is must. As even the data shows that wherever woman participation is there, in any field of the life, the productivity has improved, the efficiency has improved. And this program itself is a witness. What I can see is most of the female participation is there. The male participation, we have a large number of male colleagues and the students, but most of the students are in girls, and the organizers are also all the female colleagues. This itself speaks volumes that how efficient the woman workforce is, provided you give the opportunity to them. So my earnest, sincere request to all of you is, you become the ambassador of this issue. And if you become the ambassador, each one of you spread this knowledge among the community that if you want to take the country forward, you have to respect the women, and you have to give them the equal participation in every decision making that you take. Because merely enacting the law will not suffice unless you change your mindset, unless the social fabric of this country changes and we learn to respect the woman, the results will not come. The results will only come when the social mindset of the people, or the mindset of the people, changes. Then only the things will come. What is happening today, that these laws, and one more thing I would like to caution here, that these laws are sometimes being misused. That you, among the women itself, we have to make an understanding. This laws which the government has given you rights, these rights should be properly being used. And it is not an issue which pertains to the intergender. Within the gender also, what I have observed over a period of time is that if some female workers are working hard, they want to give something more to the organization, the other female counterparts feel envy of it, and they pass on offensive remarks. I think this should also come under harassment at workplace, means sexual harassment at workplace. Because one of the lady, or one of the women, or one of the male, it's not both ways, is not working. And if boss happens to be a woman, right? Because in India, throughout the world, we follow at workplace, we follow hierarchy system. And in the hierarchy system, you have to work with the both the genders do work. And if your boss happens to be the other gender, and if you're working hard, your people of your own gender passes offensive remarks, that is not a very good thing. And this discourages the person of that gender to work more, because after all, you have to live in the society and you are being influenced by that. So this is also a very serious issue. The other thing I would like to point out, that in each of the organization, there should be continuous training. There should be a training on this program, that how we can work together, right? So if we have a continuous training, if you have a continuous system in the organization where people become more sensitive towards this issue, this will make a change among the people. So there is an ongoing process. This process will continue, but this is the right beginning, which in each of the organization, there's a rule now that there should be a proper grievance committee. There should be proper laws, how you can file the complaint if you are feeling so, if you are being suffering because of that. So there is a proper guidelines in each of the manual of the organization, right? There should be a proper procedure that how the complaint has to be lodged, what is the grievance mechanism system in the organization, and they must be assured that if you file a complaint, if you are being sufferer, then there will be no further harassment because of you being you are being the applicant for the you being the you have submitted your or complaint against some person. So organization must make sure that the person who files the complaint is not being subject to harassment, right? And for this, the top management, means in colleges, in universities, it is the vice chancellor, it is the principals of the college, and the people who are in the decision-making process, who are there, they help the affairs in the organization, the chairman, the MDs, and all these people must make sure that people work without fear, right? People work with, with such an atmosphere which is good for the organization. And I'm sure if we adopt this, and if this is a gradual process, if we keep on doing these things, I'm sure the time is not far off when we will have a good atmosphere at the workplace, and these things people will be sensitized. And I think, at least I can talk of the universities and these things. These are very sensitive issues. Universities are taking due care of this, whether it is students, whether it is teachers, all these things are being due taken. But we have to work a lot on this in this direction. And once again, I would like to thank, in the end, I would like to thank Dr. Vinita for being a resource person, because they are our partners in this program. We are organizing many such programs in collaboration with the Ramjas College. Unfortunately, the principal of the college is busy in some otherwise we would have been here. He told me yesterday, right? But I'm sure Dr. Vinita will represent him, right? And she's not only the resource person, she's also representing the Ramjas College. And I'm also thankful to the Samvedna, this whole team, the organizing committee members, for giving me opportunity to be present, to having me here in this fine morning, right? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your inspiring words. We are grateful to Professor Manoj Khanna, Principal of Ramjas College, for agreeing to the collaboration of Gender Sensitization Forum of Ramjas College and Samvedna, the Gender Sensitization Forum of Shri Aurobindo College. This initiative will help students of both the colleges' forums to exchange ideas on relevant issues, and most importantly, the gender bias will have a wider reach. Before moving further, I would request everyone to kindly turn on their cameras for a group photograph.
कुर्सी लगा दे, कॉमर्स वाले कहाँ है?
Today, as a guest speaker, we have with us Dr. Vinita Chandra, one of the founding members of the Gender Forum, Ramjas College, who has published and given interviews about sexual harassment extensively over the last few years, and has been involved with the gender issues and sexual harassment for last 2 decades. Before inviting her to speak, I would like to acquaint our audience with her professional background. Ma'am has done her bachelor's, master's, and MPhil in English literature from University of Delhi. She has done her master's in English literature and PhD from Rutgers University, USA. She is an associate professor at Ramjas College, University of Delhi. She has contributed a chapter to the Routledge Handbook of the Politics of the Me Too movement, which came out in 2021. She teaches a module in the United Nations University Equality Scholarship and Training GEST in Iceland on gender security and violence. We are honored to have you, ma'am, amongst us. Gentle reminder, if you have any questions related to the session, kindly jot down in the chat box and it will be addressed by our ma'am at the end of the session. Participants, kindly note that we will circulate a feedback form, so kindly fill that to ensure your participation certificate. Without any further ado, I would like to invite you, ma'am. The stage is all yours. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Ria, for introducing me. Thank you, Samvedna, for inviting me. I've been in touch with Dr. Shobna Chandra and with Dr. Rashmi Mathur. Thank you so much for organizing this. And my very special thanks to Professor Agarwal for being over here and addressing everyone. I truly believe that in the society that we live in today, I think it is the credit goes to the principal of the college, that so many women feel free under his principalship to come together and do so much work. So many students feel free to come and do this work, because it's very often the executive authority that does not allow women's voices to be heard. So I think in a college, if so many women are coming together to do something, I think a lot of that credit goes to the principal of the college. So Professor Agarwal, thank you so much for joining here also. And I'm just, I think the credit goes to you to creating this space here, for this work. I just want to say that what Professor Agarwal is saying is absolutely true, that this has to be an ongoing process. It's never a one-time thing. And one of the reasons for that is that this way of thinking, of making spaces hostile for women, students and teachers, is so ingrained in us. And as he pointed out, it is not just the men who do it, it's also the women who do it to each other. So how do we make this space more amicable, more welcoming for women to come in and to work, and for students to come in and work? So what I'm going to talk about today, and I don't know, will you just, somebody will tell me how much time do I have to speak? What I usually do is I take about 45 minutes, but I like to leave a lot of time for questions, because this really is about question answer. So what would you say?
We are all ears. Thank you so much.
Okay, all right then. I'll try not to make it very, very long, but there's just so many things to say about this. I think that's the whole thing. So I have tried to keep it as brief as I can. Sexual harassment, the way in which we understand it usually is if someone gets catcalled or whistled or, touched or something like that. But sexual harassment is also creating a hostile workspace. And I'm going to talk about that as well. I want to divide my talk into two parts. One is to talk about the 2013 Parliament Act, about sexual harassment of women in the workplace, and the other is to talk about the UGC and the UGC Act, the 2016 one that you all referred to. But I want to spend a larger part of my talk on talking about why sexual harassment is there. Because after all, if the Parliament has had to pass a law, the UGC has had to pass a law, committees have to be put in place, then I think it's very important for us to discuss why do we have sexual harassment at all, and the need for that gender sensitization. So I'm going to try to spend longer talking about that. And I know that that is usually what students and other people have more questions about. So I'll try to leave some time, to talk about the questions. I'll talk about the law briefly, but if there's anything that you would like me to go over more about the law, then in the question answer session, please do just go ahead and ask me. So I know that most of you must be knowing this, but I just want to start with the history of the law. And I don't know if you all are aware of the Vishakha judgment, which came out in 97, under which the university had Ordinance 15D, which was our first sexual harassment ordinance, which came out in 2003. And the Vishakha judgment, I'm going to talk about it very briefly because that's not the most important thing here, was about this woman in Rajasthan who was working for an NGO, which was to stop child marriages. And she, in her work, stopped a child marriage in an upper caste person's home in Rajasthan, and therefore she got gang raped by many men of that community. She filed an FIR. Nothing happened with the case. But the Vishakha judgment is a group of NGOs who took up this thing with the Supreme Court and said that she was raped because of her work. And this is actually sort of, I think it's important to mention this because, as Professor Agarwal mentioned in the beginning, when women go out of the home to work, then there is a certain kind of harassment that happens to them in their line of work. Because her work was to stop child marriages and she had done that, so she was harassed. So similarly, if we see in college, I mean, because a student is a president of a society, she gets harassed, or because she's speaking up, she gets harassed. This is what happens in the workspace. And I'm not going to talk about domestic harassment very much at all, because that's a whole other thing. That's a centuries old thing. But the new thing is of what happens to women when they step out of the home. So because of that, then the Supreme Court said that every workplace had to have an ordinance in place to protect women from harassment in the workplace. And Ordinance 15D, which you all must be aware of, I'm sure Dr. Shobna and Dr. Rashmi were aware of this, also had a college complaints committee as well, which also was there to take up cases. But I don't know if you all remember what happened in 2012, because all of you, the students, must have been very young at that time. I know my colleagues here will all remember, the faculty will. In 2012, there was a terrible rape case that happened in Delhi. It's called the Nirbhay rape case. Her name was actually Jyoti Singh. And just for those students who may not remember, because you all were very young at that time, there was a young woman who had gone out to see a movie. She was coming back with a friend, a male friend. It was 7 o'clock in the evening, so it's not even like it was very late or anything. She was looking for a bus to get home, and she got into a bus that was empty. She and her friend got in. There were 5 men in the bus who were just roaming around looking for a woman to rape, and they picked her up. They raped her very brutally, very, very violently, and she almost died. Now, it's not like this rape itself is unusual, but what did happen at that time is it caught the eye of the media, and the media talked about this. And at that time, young people like you, many students from college, but also many students from school, class 11, 12, they all gathered at India Gate over a week's time. And they protested, and they said that something had to be done for Jyoti Singh, first of all, who was in a hospital in Delhi, and that the country had to be made safer for women. And so then at that time, of course, what happened then was that the government put in a law in Parliament. There was a lot of consultation over this law. It was finally passed in 2013, and it was also a new rape law. And it put many things into place, which I don't really have time to talk about right now, but it's really worth looking at it. Many of the things, for instance, it redefined what rape means. So rape would not mean only penetration. Rape would mean any, many other kinds of things. So it made the definition of rape much more. It redefined the ways in which rape trials take place. So for instance, I don't know how many, I know that all the faculty here will remember this, but there used to be the 2-finger test case to see if a woman is raped or not. That was done away with only in 2013. I mean, it's hard to think that these things were placed even until 2013. And it talked about how these things should happen. But along with this, the Parliament Act also then included an entire section on harassment of women, sexual harassment of women in the workplace. So I just want to share that with you very quickly, my screen with you. Ankita, I see, has a question, and of course I can take the question here if you all like, and otherwise we could perhaps keep the questions for the end. But yes, Ankita. Okay. Should we?
She need to unmute herself. Maybe she doesn't know that she's muted. Ankita, if you have a query, please unmute, or you can type in the chat box.
Okay.
It's a mistake.
Okay. I also just wanted to say, because I know that this is something that almost all lectures on sexual harassment do, is to just give a trigger warning, which I think is standard procedure nowadays. So the trigger warning is that there are going to be, I'm going to try to not make anything very graphic, but there are going to be descriptions of sexual violence in some cases. So that's a trigger warning, and I'll try to say that before I actually say anything, so that if you like, you can turn off your computer for a minute or two, because in the past we've had people who perhaps have been sexually harassed themselves, who have left a meeting because they have been so upset just to hear it being talked about. So I just wanted to say this before I start. So I'm just going to present my screen and just show you the 2013 Parliament Act, so that we can take a quick look at it. Let's see, why does my share? Okay, I don't need permission to share. No, yes, here it is. It's just being a little slow. This is the law. Okay, can you all see my screen?
Yes, yes.
You can.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So this is the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act 2013. As you see, this is a Gazette of India document. And I'm sure that all of you have this document. You know, what I wanted to read out from this document really was just to look at the fundamental rights that are guaranteed. And I wanted to look at this part of it. Whereas sexual harassment results in violation of the fundamental rights of a woman to equality under Articles 14 and 15 of the Constitution of India, and her right to life and to live with dignity. So one of the reasons I just wanted to share this with you is, you know, very often sexual harassment of women is thought to be just something that women are talking about, are being just oversensitive about, or overreacting to, and it seems to be a trivial thing. You know, if you're staring at a woman, you think it's just not a big deal. All that you're doing is staring. If a woman is being stared at also, sometimes she thinks it's just not a big deal. But under the Constitution of our country, and I'm sure all of you have done civics at least in class 9 and 10, you know how important the fundamental rights guarantee to all of us in the Constitution are. And Articles 14 and 15 guarantee right to life and to live with dignity. So the Constitution doesn't just guarantee our right to life, it also means that right to life is to live with dignity. And I just want us to understand that what we are talking about today is extremely crucial, because sexual harassment violates the fundamental rights that are guaranteed to each of us. So the right to live with dignity under 21 of the Constitution, and right to practice any profession or to carry on any occupation or trade or business, which includes a right to safe environment free from sexual harassment. So our profession or trade, occupation, trade, business is to study. All of you are students, that's your occupation, that's your profession. And for the rest of us, we are teachers. And the Constitution guarantees us the right to practice our profession in a safe environment free from sexual harassment. Now, we know that Delhi University is certainly not a space that is free from sexual harassment. We know that. And we know that because the university actually shuts down a day before Holi, shuts down at certain times, because we take it for granted that sexual harassment is going to happen. So when that happens, then I think it's important for us to recognize that this goes against the Constitution. It's not just a small trivial matter that we are talking about. So this is the document, and it also gives a definition of sexual harassment and so on. This came out in 2013, and in 2015, the UGC, under which all of us by which all of us are governed. I'll just share this with you here. This is the UGC University Grants Commission. This came out. It was notified in 2016, but it actually comes out in 2015, which is what Ria was referring to earlier on. And this is a document that I'm sure all of you have already. Usually I mail it to everyone, but I know that you all are familiar with this. And this document, which came in was notified to us in 2016, it lays down very, very clearly what the procedure for setting up these committees are, and what how it should be done. But before I talk about that, I want to look at the definition of sexual harassment in this document. And I think that this is one of the best definitions of sexual harassment that I have ever seen, actually. As Ria introduced me, I teach a module in the United Nations University in Reykjavik, and that has policymakers, young policymakers from across the world. And so we try to look at definitions of sexual harassment in different parts of the world. And I just want you to know that every year I find that this definition that we have in India is recognized as the best. So I just want us to read through this. Sexual harassment means an unwanted conduct with sexual undertones, if it occurs, or which is persistent and which demeans humiliates, or creates a hostile and intimidating environment. So when we think about demeaning and humiliating, then remember that remarks made about women, comments passed about them, staring, stalking, all of these things demean and humiliate, and they also create a hostile and intimidating environment, or is calculated to induce submission by actual or threatened adverse consequences, and includes any one or more or all of the following unwelcome acts or behavior. Now, I want us to just focus on unwelcome here, and I will talk about this in a little bit detail later on and answer questions if you like. But remember that there is a difference between sexual harassment and something that happens consensually. So the emphasis is on unwelcome. So you may find that you're ready to hug a friend who you're comfortable with, but for another person, even if they put their hand on your shoulder and you don't want it, that's unwelcome. So the definition of sexual harassment depends on the consent or the welcome of the person to whom it is directed, not the intention of the person who's doing it. And these are the acts. Any unwelcome, so unwelcome is repeated here, physical, verbal, or non-verbal conduct of sexual nature. Now, we know that physical, of course, is comes under sexual harassment. So if somebody touches you or molests you, assaults you, that of course is sexual harassment, as we know, or sexual assault even. We know that you can be verbally sexually harassed also. That is, that abuse, actual comments. But what's really interesting, what's really significant about this definition is it also includes non-verbal conduct. And that non-verbal conduct can be gestures, can be staring, can be following, stalking. All of these come under non-verbal, and this is something that most countries don't actually specify. B, demand or request for sexual favors. C, making sexually colored remarks. D, physical contact and advances. Or E, showing pornography. Now, I just want to speak a minute about C and E, that is making sexually colored remarks and showing pornography. As women, we know that very often when a conversation is happening which is overtly sexual in nature, it makes us feel uncomfortable. Not always, but very often it does. Or when on WhatsApp groups, pornographic images are shared, or somebody is looking at pornography or showing us pornography. And that is, I'm going to talk about why that makes us feel uncomfortable, but that is a very common way of doing sexual harassment. Because if it happens in a group of people, or it happens in a conversation where a person knows that somebody else is going to be uncomfortable, they do that to make that person uncomfortable. That is sexual harassment. And in the second part, number 2, any one or more than one or all of the following circumstances, if it occurs or is present in relation or connected with any behavior that has explicit and implicit sexual undertones. I just want us to look at D and E. A, B, and C are very relevant for faculty members, but because this is the largest student gathering, I just talk about D and E. Creating an intimidating, offensive, or hostile learning environment. So I think one of the things we take for granted, we used to until before the pandemic, is the space of the classroom. That has to be a safe space. And I think what I have seen in cases that have come to me formally and informally over the last 20 years is that sexual harassment actually creates so much hostility in the learning environment that students are not able to learn. If you're living in fear, that you're going to get a text from someone, or that when you come out of the class, there's going to be a group of people outside there, or that somebody is following you around and is going to be there when you come out of the classroom, or you're being stared at in class. How are you going to be able to learn if half your mind is taken up with fear? And I know we're all familiar with that wonderful poem by Rabindranath Tagore, where the mind is without fear and the head is held high. So if the mind has fear in it, you cannot hold your head high, you cannot think, you cannot learn. And I think one of the things that happens systemically in the university and classrooms is that people are afraid, and so half of their energies are taken up by that fear, and it takes away from that learning environment. And E of this says humiliating treatment likely to affect the health, safety, dignity, or physical integrity of the person concerned. And I know this sounds like it might be a little exaggerated, but one of the things that I have seen over the years is that someone who is constantly being humiliated, very often by a teacher in a classroom or by people in the college, that they actually have a mental breakdown, that they have a nervous breakdown, that if their mental health is affected, which often results, you talk about physical integrity. We know that mental stress can lead to stomach disorders, it can lead to skin disorders, it can lead to all kinds of other things. This comes across much more because when students come and start talking, even though they seem like they're okay, they very often start crying. And the fact that they're crying shows how much mental stress there has been within them. So this part of the of what sexual harassment is, I just wanted to read out to you all before we carry on with the discussion further about why there is sexual harassment in the first place. I won't go into very much detail with the redressal. If you look at the document, it tells you what the college should be doing in supportive measures and all that, and all of that is there. I'm just going to look very, very quickly at the grievance redressal mechanism, which I know that Dr. Rashmi Mathur must have done with you all, and you all are aware of this. But every, sorry, I'm scrolling up and down. Every executive authority shall constitute an internal complaints committee with an inbuilt mechanism of gender sensitization, which is exactly what your committee is doing right now against sexual harassment. And it shall have, the ICC shall have this composition. There should be a presiding officer who is a woman, and then there should be 2 faculty members and 2 non-teaching employees, preferably committed to the cause of women, or who have had experience in social work or have legal knowledge, nominated by the executive authority. And I just want to say that, as Professor Agarwal also talked about constant training and of people, it's very important that the ICC has members who have some idea of gender sensitization, and some idea of working with in this area. Because if they don't, then the worst thing that an ICC can do is that when a complaint comes before it, it doesn't recognize that this is sexual harassment, and it basically gaslights the victim and makes the matter even worse. And then there are, it should be 3 students if the matter involves students, who shall be enrolled at the undergrad, master's, research, scholar level respectively, elected through transparent democratic procedure, and 1 member from outside. Now, I know that elections have not taken place this year because of the pandemic. I just wanted to share with you all, I'm not sure the procedure that you all follow, I just wanted to share with you all something that about the election of students. Ordinance 15D, which was in place from 2003 to 2013 or 14 almost, because by the time we got the Parliamentary Act, it was 2014, had a very clear laid down procedure about how to elect students. But when the UGC notification came in, UGC regulation was passed in 2015, it actually did not say anything about student elections at all. And in 2016, when we got this notification, it didn't say anything. I personally, with people from other colleges, Kirodimal Sociology Department, Venkateshwara College, many of us have been going repeatedly to the Dean of Colleges and asking them to give us a uniform way of electing students. Just before the pandemic, we had decided that we would all, those of us who've been working in this area, would put together a document and sit with the dean and pass it for everyone. And of course, because of the pandemic, this work has been stopped. But what we in Ramjas have continued to do is to follow Ordinance 15D. And Ordinance 15D, which is no longer on the website, but it's a wonderful document, and you all, could think of reading through it also, which was superseded by the UGC regulation. This actually talks about how the elections should be done, and it says that elections should be done class-wise. So every class, that is, if you are history honor students, then first year, second year, third year are 3 different classes, and elections should be done in each class. And when you have members from each class, then that forms the electoral body for electing the 3 students to the ICC. And that body of students, the students that have been elected from each class, then form the Gender Sensitization Committee. This is what Ordinance 15D had put in place, and this is what we continue to follow, because there is nothing else in place for us right now. So this is so much for the law, and we can come back to it, we can talk about it at any time that you all want. But I actually want to go on to the next part of what I want to spend a little time on. is to talk about sexual harassment itself. That why do we have sexual harassment at all? Doesn't it seem like, now it's 2021 and you just think that women have achieved so much, and men also should have got this awareness. So why does so much sexual harassment happen? And I'm going to speak about 3 or 4 different things in this. But the first thing I just want to make very, very clear to everyone is that sexual harassment is never about sexual desire. It is not a problem of sexual attraction. Sexual harassment always happens because the person who is doing it wants to have power and wants to control the other person. And I think the 2 things need to be separated very clearly in our heads before we get into this at all. And the reason I'm saying this right at the outset is because when I talk about this, it seems like I'm saying, like, boys and girls should never talk to each other. They should just never have any relationship with each other. And of course, I'm not saying that at all. I am we're talking about sexual harassment. And I'll talk in the end a little bit about the space of the university for exploring relationships, and we can talk about that later on in the end if you're like. But if we know for a fact now, enough research has shown us this over the years, that rape, for instance, is not a crime of sex. Rape is a crime of violence. And this is why, as in the Nirbhay case, as in so many other cases, it always has to do with violence. It is never a crime of wanting to have sex with somebody. So we know this about rape entirely now. And I want us to look at the same thing with sexual harassment. So why does sexual harassment happen? Because if sexual harassment is so rampant, I think most men need to acknowledge that they could be sexual harassers at some point or the other. So just to give a clarification, I am going to be talking about women and men, but I know that it is not only women who get sexually harassed. I know that there are a lot of people who do not identify as cisgender, non-cisgender people. I know that there are binary, people who are not just binary, who are non-binary genders. I know that there are men who are, we don't even have a language to talk about this because the word effeminate is so derogatory. But men who are not the way hyper masculine that society expects them to be, who also get harassed. Men who wear different kinds of clothes, have different kinds of behavior, who are not toxic masculine, who have long hair, for instance, also get harassed. And we know that transgender people get harassed all the time. So I'm going to say women because as a shortcut, but I actually mean anyone who's getting harassed, even if it is a cisgender male. And so as I say women, please remember that I mean I'm taking into account all of these. Why does sexual harassment happen? So one of the things that I want us to look at is the way in which society has taught us to look at women. Society has taught us to look at women as objects. It has objectified women entirely. So when you have advertisements, for instance, you're selling a car, but there's a woman sitting on top of it. You're selling a washing machine, but there's a woman with it. You're selling, even if it's an RO water system, there's a woman over there with it. And the woman has to be what we consider an attractive woman. That is what our society considers as an attractive woman. Even if it's a doctor telling you to buy the right toothpaste, it's a really attractive looking woman, who's a doctor. She's usually the way in which we think of as attractive. So one of the things that happens then is that from the time that we are very, very young, we are taught to see a woman's body the same as a car. The car is made out of metal and rubber, and I don't know. I'm not a science person, so I don't know all these things. And a woman's body is seen to be the same way. It's just made out of legs and waist and hair and eyes and breast. It's not really seen to be a human being inside this body at all. And when we are taught through everything that surrounds us. Really, I mean, you watch movies, there's a way in which women's bodies, the heroine has to be a very attractive person. All look at all our Aishwarya Rais and so on, and they have to be really attractive in a certain way. Look at the way the camera looks at them. I remember some years ago when we had the Olympics, the women athletes sent out an appeal to the media. They said, please don't look up our skirts. They said, we are here because we're athletes. Can you please focus on our athletic abilities? So the fact that we are surrounded by media, especially today, and by a mainstream society that looks at women's bodies as objects. So one is looking at women's bodies as objects in the popular media. The other is, remember that women's bodies are also seen only for a utilitarian purpose. That is, that women are meant to have babies. That's it. So it's almost as if you are sort of, reduced to the uterus, as it were. And, in every culture, I'm not talking only about India, I'm talking about cultures across the world, except a very few Nordic countries, I think. But, women who can't have children are called barren. I mean, that's just such a terrible word to use. And in Hindi, we say banj, which is just such a horrible word. But women are only seen as reproductive sources. So you know how all women are told all the time, your biological clock is ticking, you need to have children, as if women who don't have children are sort of less than women who have children. So there is a way in which even that woman's body is seen as an object, as almost like a machine, really, as it were, to produce a child. And also, if we look at the way that we look at women's labor, women's bodies are also seen to perform labor which is never recognized as a human being inside it. So if you look at housework, it's always the mother or the wife that one goes to see whether there's food over there, there's something in the fridge or not, where are your socks, where are my clothes, why is my bed not made, why is there dust in my room. So there is a way in which women are defined according to the labor that they perform. And it seems to have to do with a woman's whole identity, because if you go to a house and the house is dirty, it seems as if the woman who is in the house is an immoral woman, because she can't keep her house clean or she doesn't know how to cook. So one of the things I want us to look at is that there is a society that has not come up today, that has been in place for hundreds of years, that has objectified women's bodies and taken away their humanity entirely. So the woman is, the body of the woman is not seen to be, with a human being inside it at all. And so therefore, when somebody stares at a woman, it's like there's a body that's walking down the street. It's not a human being at all. It's not Rashmi or Shobna or Vinita. It's just a body. And so you can stare at it. If you want to touch it, you can touch it, because after all, you can touch a car, you can touch a washing machine, you can buy a tube of toothpaste. So why can't you touch this body? And it doesn't seem to be as if there's a human being. And one of the things that I always think about is after the Nirbhay rape case, I don't know how many of you remember this, but there was a documentary that was made by this woman. It was called Daughter of India, I think. And I watched that documentary because this woman had gone and interviewed the rapists inside jail. And I remember with one of the people that she had, one of the men she had interviewed, he said to her that, he said, at that time we didn't know what this girl was. We were just looking for a girl to rape, and we found her. And I don't know if you all remember that after the rape case, her parents, Jyoti Singh's parents, came on television. They gave interviews. They talked about how when they had a daughter in their district, in their village or their town, everyone thought they'd be very sad, but they actually held a feast for everyone to say we've had a daughter. And they sold land to save money to put her through medical college. She was going to be a physiotherapist. She was training to be a physiotherapist, and they talked about all these things. They were not ashamed that their daughter had been raped, as most people are. They talked about her. And so when this woman interviews this rapist, he said that at that time we didn't know anything. We didn't know that her parents wanted to have a daughter and that they had sold their land to put her through medical college. We didn't know that she was going to be a physiotherapist. We didn't know any of these things. Now, he, of course, doesn't have the vocabulary to say what he means. But as someone who works in this area, or any of us, we understand what is happening here. He just saw a body. He didn't see a human being. And I know he's a rapist, and I know what he did is terrible. But what he did is what society has taught him to do. Society has taught him that this is not a woman, this is a body, that this is a woman, this is a body that's out in the open, so she is available for everybody. She's with one man, so why can't all the men have her? And in a sense, if you think about it, this is the training that society gives us, that women's bodies are available to anybody at all if they are outside the home, and that you're not really doing anything wrong in touching it or staring at it or doing any of these things. And I remember a couple of years ago, we had a Gender Forum festival in which our students had made posters. And this one student had made a poster in which there was a woman's body and it had eyes stuck all over it, just big graphic eyes stuck all over it. And it represented, at least for me right away, the way in which women feel when they're stared at. And remember, when I mean women, I also mean non-cisgender men, and I mean just non-masculine men who are stared at as well, but perhaps much more for women. And we know, all of us know, that when you are stared at, it feels like you're covered with mud or with dirt. It doesn't feel like someone is just looking, because after all, they're not touching you at all. And we, all of us, know that if we have been sexually molested, I mean, I think I was still going to college in LSR when I got sexually molested in a DTC bus. I was 18 years ago, which is now 40 years ago, and I still remember exactly how horrible it felt. That feeling is still there with me today. So when women get touched so casually, and we all know this happens all the time. You're standing somewhere, a man comes and stands next to you. You know that what he's doing, but you don't want to move away because you try to think maybe it's by mistake. But we all know how it makes us feel. So one of the things that I just want us to think about, the objectification of women, that women's bodies are made into objects that are then available for everyone. And look, this is not any one man's fault. This is not any one student's fault. This is the way that society has brought us up, all of us, even the women. And so when we think of sexual harassment and sensitization, the first thing we need to remember is that there's a human being inside that body, and that human being has feelings, and that human being is not is an entire person by herself, not just a body. And what I do want to say is that I started out by saying that sexual harassment is always about power and control. And remember that one of the things about women's bodies is that they need to be controlled, always need to be controlled. And just to talk about how, as a society, we all think we need to control women's bodies. I just want us to talk about something that I know that you're going to be bored when I even say the word, because it's like we all know about it, but it's the crucial foundational reason why sexual harassment happens, and that's patriarchy. So I always warn everyone before I use the word patriarchy, because it feels like we all know what patriarchy is, and we all, we know that it exists all around us, and we are all aware of it now. But I think patriarchy is so intrinsic. It is so closely networked to every single belief that we have, that I don't think anyone can escape patriarchy, not even me, who has talked about it for years, or many other people who I know. I think patriarchy is there in everything, even in our language. So you see, when I wanted to say non-masculine men, and I didn't want to use the word effeminate, patriarchy has not given us another word to talk about men who are not the way that society wants them to be. When I say non-masculine men, that in itself is a very derogatory way of talking about it, because patriarchy has only given us this idea of masculine and feminine. So you can have masculine women or feminine men. So it is so closely entrenched in every single way of thinking that we have, that it is inescapable for us, absolutely. So there's two things patriarchy does. One is that it sees women as inferior, and it keeps them in that inferior position. Now, patriarchy is not simply, can you still hear me? Because my camera has frozen. Okay, you can hear me, yes. All right. So patriarchy is not about a few men. Patriarchy is systemic. Patriarchy is structural. And if we look at systemic and structural, what do we mean? Patriarchy is backed by laws. It is backed by traditions and conventions and culture, by religion. So if we look at laws, for instance, let me say that the domestic violence law is a law that has been passed very, very recently in our country. And it has been passed so recently, and for so many centuries, domestic violence has been taken for granted that even today, when you try to register a domestic violence case with the police, most of the time, the police will send you back saying, look, I mean, it's your husband who's doing it. You must have done something wrong. As a matter of fact, a recent survey in India shows that more than 50% men and women think it's okay for a husband to beat his wife. So, but legally, it is only in the last, I think that domestic violence law passed 3 or 4 years ago. It's very, very recent. We still don't have a marital rape law, because the same 2013 law had also got a section on marital rape, and that marital rape law was turned down, saying that if we have a marital rape law in India, it goes against our Sanskriti because it will destroy Indian families. And this comment was made by a woman minister. And think about it. I mean, does that mean that the Indian family, the foundation of it is the rape of the wife, the rape of the mother? Is that what makes an Indian family what it is? But if you look at other laws, we have now laws are changing so that now women can inherit their father's property, even if it's filed under HUF. But remember that until a few years ago, women could not inherit their father's property, did not have an equal right in it. So this patriarchy is not simply about what men think. It is embedded in our structure. And just so that I don't know how many of you know this, but it's very recently, that is in the last 100 years, that even in the US and UK, the law against rape has changed so that where if a woman was raped, the crime was not against her because she didn't own her body. A woman didn't own her body. Her body was owned by her father if she was not married. It was owned by her husband if she was married. If her husband had died, it was owned by her son. The only woman who owned her body was a woman who didn't have a husband, father, son, or brother. Otherwise, if the woman was raped, the crime was seen against her, seen against the male member who owned her body. And 100 years is nothing. So this has changed only 100 years ago. And if you look at the repercussions of this idea that a woman doesn't really own her body, one of the things that we see is honor killings all the time. That is that if a woman is raped or if a woman marries the wrong person, then it's not just seen as something against her. We always say ki khandan ki naak kaat diya. That it is against the whole khandan, it is against the whole clan, against the whole family. So a woman's body, if it has what the interactions that a woman's body has with a man or anything at all, or the clothes that she wears or anything she does, is always a reflection of that particular society. As a matter of fact, just yesterday I was talking to a colleague of mine from Ramjas College who was telling me that she was having an arranged marriage, and the people said to her parents that if you buy the clothes that are bought for her, that is that her parents will buy for her, they said that the in-laws will buy those clothes for her because now she will represent the in-laws, and the clothes that she wears should show what the in-laws want her to wear. It should show the status of the in-laws. So look at the way in which the body of the woman is never owned by herself at all. What she does with her body is the business of the entire society and of her family and of her in-laws and so on. So this whole idea of this whole idea of patriarchy is not something that has to do only with men. As a matter of fact, I would say that the men who I have in this room right now, in this Google Meet link, are not the men who have created patriarchy or can go against patriarchy so easily. That is something that is so deeply ingrained from the time we grow up that I think most of us find it very difficult to resist. But more than laws, even if you look at all our traditions and customs, all of them are so patriarchal by nature that we don't even think of them. And I have been raised as a Hindu, so those are the laws that I know, those are the customs I know more about. But if you think of the family, if you think of the marriage ceremony, the Vedic marriage ceremony, it has to have a Kanyadan. Now, for those people who are not familiar with Hindi, the Kanya is the girl and Dan is like donating or giving away in charity. And if you look at that entire ritual, the father holds the daughter's hand, and I think the husband has his hand below the father's hand, and then the father removes his hand, and the girl's hand is given. The girl's hand is given to the father, and so she's basically being donated. And at the same time, I don't know how many customs have this, or if this is particular to some parts of the country and not all, but the father will wash the husband's feet. And I have to tell you that, I got married, I went through all these things, and I look at that video now and I think to myself, why on earth should my father, why should he be washing any boy's feet at all? And the Kanyadan is usually done with gold or with something like that, depending on the status of the family. So, but it's something that we take so much for granted that even today, if I am to say that don't do Kanyadan, people just say it's not a big deal, it's just there, it's just not a big deal. But it is a big deal because it's something that we have internalized, that the girl is being given away. And if you look at the whole ceremony, I know it must be different in different communities, but when the girl is leaving her house, she throws whatever rice or something over her shoulder to say, I have left behind everything in this house that I got, and now I'm going to another house. So the girl basically is seen, her identity is seen as completely contingent. She has spent all her life in this house. Now she is being told this is not your house anymore, and you're going away to another house. She will change her last name to show that she is now the property of her husband. She will wear all kinds of markers to show that she's a married woman, whereas men neither have to change the Mr. when they get married, nor do they have to wear anything to show that they are married at all. But women need to have all those markers to say, I am so-and-so's property. And very often women's names are changed when they go to another house, so that you know that this is you have changed your personality completely. And these are things that we all take for granted. I mean, we don't even really think about these things at all. As a matter of fact, if a woman doesn't change her name, then she is constantly called out by everybody around her. My own house has a nameplate outside which has my husband's name and my name on it. And for years, I have had aunts telling me, oh my God, this looks like you live in sin with somebody else. And where do you even start explaining any of those things? And it's not just the Hindu this thing. If you look at what Bollywood has shown us all these years, Hollywood, sorry, it's there in Christian weddings as well. So it looks so beautiful. The girl is on her father's arm and he's walking her down the aisle, and then he hands her over to the husband, and everyone is crying because it's so beautiful. Look at the way that our aesthetics, what we consider beautiful and what we consider not beautiful, is also governed by patriarchy. Because to think that this is exactly the same way, it's called the giving away of the bride. And the father is giving that bride away, but it's clothed in all this beauty so that it seems to be the only way to function. And so one of the things patriarchy does is it also normalizes and naturalizes this possession of women by men in a society. And it does it so intrinsically from the time that we are born that we think that this is God-made, and we don't really question it at all. So for instance, if the woman is cooking in the house, it seems to be that somehow God or nature has made her the person who should do the cooking, and that men are not really good at cooking. So we're constantly being told, even women will say, when my husband comes into the kitchen to cook, he makes such a mess of the whole place and so on. So it's as if there's some natural organ that has come by nature to make woman a cook and man not a cook. But let me point out one very crucial thing to you all, which when you have chefs, when you look at all your master chefs, Australia and USA and all that, they're all men. When it comes to being highly paid for cooking, they're all men. But when it comes to cooking in the house, for some reason, it seems as if nature has given a special organ to the woman to cook, which the man doesn't have at all. If you look at the thing, at cleaning, so, if you see a dirty house, it's always the woman's fault, always, right? Never the man. No one will tell the man, why haven't you done dusting, or why didn't you sweep your house? Nobody will say it. But if you look at hotels which have housekeeping departments, it is always the men who will come and train the women on how to do the cleaning. I was doing a faculty development program with one of the colleges recently, and there's a young male colleague over there, and he said, ma'am, I understand everything you're saying, but I must tell you, I know that some of you may not know Hindi. I'm just going to say it in Hindi quickly. जब मेरी wife झाड़ू पकड़ती है ना, तो कमाल ही कुछ और होता है. Basically, that when his wife, does the jhadu, does the sweeping, then the house is very clean. And he says that I know what you are saying, but I'm just not good at it. And because it was in a colleague in another program, I didn't say to him, but I thought to myself, practice. Just practice, for God's sakes. Nature or God did not give that woman any special organ or any special part of her brain to make her a better cleaner than you are. And the one thing that is taken for granted that women do better than men, that is looking after babies, right? Do you know that the highest paid pediatricians in the world are all men? All men. Do you know that all of us women read books by men on how to look after our babies? I know that in my generation, we all read Dr. Spock. Dr. Spock was the big person. He told us how to look after our babies. So when it comes to doing the work, somehow within the house, it seems as if women have some natural born instinct to do it. But when it comes to being told how to do it, the experts, the highly paid people are all men. But if you, even as I'm saying these things and I'm talking about them, I know that it's very difficult for us to think that in my house now, my father is going to do all the cooking or my father is going to do all the cleaning. And even for most of us women to think that my husband is going to do all this work. Remember that our houses, and this is what patriarchy does to us, all our houses have a master bedroom. It's called a master bedroom. And we can't say that just because it's called that, that's just a word that's used for it. It is a master bedroom. It's the bedroom where the man comes back from work and he relaxes. The woman comes back from her work and she goes to the kitchen. The kitchen is always seen as the space for the woman. If you visualize your house in your head, the woman is in the kitchen and the man is really sitting in the bedroom, in the master bedroom, because that's what it's been made for after all. If you see in houses that women are not, in which say women are also saying where they want space, they say, I want a space of my own. Give me a small little cubicle somewhere in the house where I can have a space of my own. The master bedroom is not her space to have as her own, as it were. So, what I'm trying to say is that patriarchy is so much part of the way in which we think. There is not a single religion that says women are equal to men. As a matter of fact, there's not a single religion that doesn't repeatedly say that women are not equal to men. Not a single religion. In all the scriptures, they say that women need to be controlled. And I have a colleague from the history department whose research work is in this area, and she quotes the scriptures. Hinduism doesn't really have Hindu texts the way the Bible or the Quran and so on, the Torah are. But many of the scriptures, they actually say that women are deceitful by nature. So they have to be kept down. They have to be controlled. If you don't control women, then their deceit will sort of ruin society. So if we think about the society in which we are raised, all of us, I don't think there's anyone who escapes it. Many of us have had, even in my generation, have had the most wonderful parents who have raised us. All of us who are here are people whose parents raised us to have jobs, and they made sure that we had those jobs. So it's not about parents or anything else, but the fact is that this is the society that has raised us, and this is what we continue to do also to our own children in many ways, because we live in that whole patriarchal society. So just coming back to the woman's body, look at how young our daughters are, and I want you girls here to think of how young you were when you first understood that your body is endangered all the time. I don't remember for myself anymore, but I do remember that my daughter was maybe 5 or 6 years old, maybe 5 or 6, I think. And I had plumbers working in the house, and she was lying on the bed and she had her legs in the air. And I said, Beta, can you pull your frock down? And she said, why should I pull my frock down? And I said, your underwear is showing. And she just looked at me and said, so what? And I remember that so clearly, because to explain to my daughter that men should not be looking at her underwear, to a 5 or 6 year old girl, where is the language for that? But the fact is that my son, it was hot at that time, he was running up and down the house without his shirt on. And the fact is that there was no problem with that. So women are very, very young when they are told that their bodies are a site of danger to them. And women are therefore told what kinds of clothes they should wear, how they should talk, how they should walk, how they should laugh, who they can meet, who they should mix freely with, when they should go out. This is something that women are told from the time that they are very, very small. And who does this to them? It's true that other women do it. Most of the time, the controlling is happening by the mother or by the mother-in-law. But remember that mother and mother-in-law has also been trained by patriarchy. And in a patriarchal world, when people say that women are the ones who do this to other women, remember that in a patriarchal society, there is no power for women at all. So if women want any power, they can only take that patriarchal power. If women decide to challenge that patriarchal power, they are the enemies of that society. And very few women can afford to do that because they are dependent in so many cases on the men around them. They are dependent on them financially, they are and economically, they're dependent on them for a place to stay, they're dependent on them for status in a society. And so very few women can actually resist it. And so that the control of the next generation's women's bodies is given to these women, and they are taught how to control that body. So one of the things is that in that same house, the son and the daughter see that the daughter is being told all these things and the son is not being told any of these things, and it becomes natural. But the other thing, if you look at all our cultural traditions, now again, as I said, that my background is mostly Hindu. So think of the Raksha Bandhan. You have a Raksha Bandhan festival every year, and the daughter, the sister, even if she's much older than the brother, will tie a Rakhi on the brother. And the brother then knows, no matter how small he is, that he has to protect his sister. And how is he going to protect her? From the time a boy is very young, this duty of protecting his sister and his mother, and then later his daughter, is put on him. And he understands he has to do this. So what is he going to do? He's going to do it by controlling her. He's going to do it by telling her what she should wear, when she should go out, what she can't do, what she can do. And how is he going to protect her? If she doesn't listen to him, he's going to kill her. We've recently seen 2 or 3 cases of honor killing, where a woman's relatives have come and killed her and her husband because she has married out of the consent of the society. And so what patriarchy also does then is that, apart from controlling and suppressing women, it makes men into jailers. It makes men into people who have to spend their entire life watching what women are doing. And this is what creates what we call toxic masculinity. Toxic masculinity is a term that the recent generation has come up with, and we have all heard it now. And look at the word toxic before masculinity. That is that men are taught to do something which is not just toxic for the society, but it's toxic for them. It basically poisons them as well. So what does this toxic masculinity do? We know that I think whoever in the administrator can actually mute Mohit.
Yeah, Mohit Rajput, can you mute yourself?
Okay, all right. I was just getting a feedback from that. So remember that if you have people in jail, then the jailer, the person who's outside, he has the duty of making sure that you can't come out of that jail. So he is imprisoned, actually, also, like the woman is imprisoned. And one of the things that men are made to do then, are taught to do, they're taught it as if it's their duty, is that they have to make sure that nobody looks at their sister. So they can't stop the other men. So what can they do? They can make sure that she doesn't talk to people, that she doesn't have a cell phone. These are all things that we are hearing now in public, that women should not wear jeans that are torn, women should not have cell phones, all these things. So a man is also put in a space where he has to determine and control a woman's body. And so when these men see other women's bodies outside, it seems that these are bodies that are not being controlled. They're in the workspace. They're doing things that they're not supposed to do. How are you going to control a woman if she's not in the house and she's gone to Aurobindo College? What are you going to do? How are you going to control her there? And so this entire system of sexual harassment comes really to keep women in control and keep women in their place. And I'll talk about toxic masculinity in a little bit after this. But I just want to make one, it's 12:49, so I've been speaking for almost an hour now, so I'm going to stop very soon. But one of the things I just want to say to you all is that sexual harassment and sexual attraction are two diametric opposites. So I think all men know that if they're really interested in a girl and they want her to be a friend, they'll be very, very careful that they don't scare her off. they'll be very careful that she doesn't feel harassed at all, that she feels safe with them, because they really want to have a friendship with her. And I'm not talking only about romantic or sexual friendships. I'm talking about any friendship, because men know that women get scared of. And I recently saw this meme, I think, on social media somewhere, in which this woman had written for men. She said, "What do you think? Do you think that we are sitting by the roadside and you go by calling out to us, this darling, I want to take you out, or you're so beautiful, or you have such nice legs?" And she says, "Do you really think we're going to come running after you and say, oh, thank you for appreciating my legs, I'm going to be your girlfriend forever now? Do you really think that's going to happen?" So when you are whistling or catcalling or passing remarks or staring at a girl, you're not showing her that you appreciate the way she looks. You are showing her that your body is in my power and my control. I can do anything to your body at any time I want. I can humiliate you. I can demean you. I can take away your control from your own body. You have no control on your body. And this is how patriarchy keeps control on women, by constantly doing this. If you think of the Vishakha judgment, where gosh, what was her name? I can't believe that her name is escaping my mind now. All of you must be remembering. Bhavari Devi. Bhavari Devi was her name. Where Bhavari Devi was gang raped by men. Why did they gang rape her? Because she was not in control anymore. And so most rapes happen for that reason. So I just want us to think about this for a second. And I'm just going to just wind up by talking a little bit about the space of the university, because all of you have come to college now. And this is a peculiar kind of a space where for the first time you're coming out. I mean, most of you first years aren't, but for the first time you're coming out into the real world, as it were. And you're coming there, you're meeting other people, you're meeting people who are the same, in the same department as you, the same age as you, have the same qualifications as you. And you are looking at the age of 18 to explore your own potential. You are looking to explore relationships. And again, by relationships, I don't mean only romantic or sexual, although this is the age when you are going to explore those relationships also. So how can any learning, any real forming of relationships happen? You have to lower your guard, because if you keep your guard up, you cannot learn. If you keep your guard up, you cannot open yourself up to new experiences. And women are taught to keep their guard up all the time. So when women lower their guard, that is when they become women, or, as I said, non-cisgender men, or any of those, they become vulnerable. And that is that vulnerability that, especially in the university space, allows a certain kind of sexual harassment to happen. And I think that is why the university space is a little bit more, it's a little bit more difficult to talk about, because what do you say to women? Can any of us who are here as teachers say to the women, just don't talk to anybody, just don't ever form relationships, don't do anything at all so that you won't be harassed? Of course not. We know that that's the most important part of growth for young people. So how do you negotiate sexual harassment in the university? And in my own college recently, there's things happening in almost all our extracurricular societies. We've had an ECAC meeting where we've decided to come up with a common document for harassment for all ECAC societies, because they also work a lot with each other after college hours and so on. They're physically with each other. So how do we govern these spaces? Okay, I have said most of what I wanted to say. I know that there's a lot of men over here, and I just want to say that toxic masculinity is very, very harmful for men. So I think a lot of the unlearning has to come from men who have to learn to not be toxic males for themselves and for the others. We know that toxic masculinity kills men. We know that more men have heart attacks than women because men suppress their emotions. We know that when a child is very small, a boy who falls down and scrapes his knee is immediately told, don't cry. You're a woman, you're a boy, don't cry, you're not a girl. I know that all the men here must have heard at many parts of their life, ki kya auraton jaisi aadatein kar rakhi hai, that why are you behaving like women? If you like to dress in a particular way, if you talk in a particular way, you're told that why are you behaving like a woman? So there is a very masculinized, toxic, masculine way that men are meant to behave. And remember that patriarchy keeps its eyes on men also, on boys, because in many ways, it is a greater threat to patriarchy if its men don't conform to this toxic masculinity. because patriarchy needs toxic males to keep the women in control. So in many ways, patriarchy is much harder on men who are not toxic males. Because then it's as if the next generation is not going to have people who have enough, mardangini, as the word is in Hindi, we say mardangini honi chahiye usme. So a man who doesn't beat his wife, who doesn't control his daughters, who doesn't control his wife, is seen as a very weak man and is made fun of by all of society. And so these are things that men are trained to treat women as objects, and I think that's something that we need to look at as well. There are so many men who have complained to me, who have spoken to me after a session like this, saying that I always thought I was bullied in school, but now I realize I was sexually harassed in school. That what happens to me is also a sexual harassment. So remember that this is as much for the men as it is also for the women. I'm going to stop now. I have a list of other things I wanted to talk about, but let me just I've seen the chat boxes buzzing with comments, but my eyesight is not that great, so I can't read the comments as they're going by. So just questions. I don't know who would want to take up those questions, read them out to me now.
Yes, ma'am. I'll do that. First of all, I would like to thank you so much for taking out time from your busy schedule and providing us with your valuable insights and guiding us on such an important topic. Surely your words will remain with us and even guide us in times of need. We hope to hold more such enriching webinars with you. Without further ado, we'll take up the Q&A session. So I can see many questions in the chat box, but I would like to take a few of them. So the first question is, how far do you think the clarity of definition of certain acts like harassment have percolated as far as countries like India is concerned?
Your voice is breaking a little bit. Just say again, how far do acts like?
Yeah, ma'am, I'll repeat it. How far do you think the clarity of definition of certain acts like harassment have percolated as far as countries like India is concerned?
Okay, percolated, that's the word you were using. How far have
Yes,
they percolated? Yeah, I think just not at all. I think not at all, really. And I think that's the thing. And this is something that Professor Agarwal said right in the beginning, that the law has its own place, but the implementation of the law is the most important thing. And this is why I said that even the ICC must have the faculty and the members, they must have a training of its own. I can't tell you, I have worked in sexual harassment committees, and very often my own colleagues will say, oh, this doesn't look like sexual harassment at all. So I think, especially in India, but in many, many countries across the world, what sexual harassment means is so unclear to men and to women. And I think the reason that this is important also is, the question that you're asking is very, very important, is because this is the work that is before us. Before we can stop sexual harassment, we have to make men and women aware of what is sexual harassment. And, if you look at women, one of the things just about the misuse of this law is that it's one of the things that people always talk about, that the law is being misused. But remember that all laws are misused. Look at tax evasion, look at, property, this thing. So many laws are misused. But actual false cases. So just to give you a little bit of data, across the world, not just in India, but this is data that comes from across the world, 71% of cases are never reported. That includes rape, that includes sexual harassment, that includes rape within the home, are not reported. 29% of cases across the world, and India certainly, is not as enlightened as, say, Iceland or Denmark or Finland, those countries that always come on top. And out of those 29% cases that are reported, roughly 30% are found to be fake cases. So 30% of 29, you all know I'm not a maths person, so I need that to figure that out. But those cases include cases which are thrown out and not because the evidence doesn't seem to be there, or because the jury doesn't agree with the evidence. And I don't know how many of you have followed 2 or 3 cases that have happened recently. One is the Tarun Tejpal verdict. I don't know if you all have seen that, in which when the evidence is all there, all of the evidence is there, even then it is the woman is the one who is being told that she talked like this to other men, her mobile things are taken. So and the state of Goa has appealed that verdict. I don't know if you saw the other judgment which came from the Mumbai High Court, where again it was a woman judge, who said that a man who had felt a girl's breast, a child, I think she's 8 or 9 or 10 or 13 years old, that does not fall under the act because there was no skin to skin contact. This man has groped her breast over her clothes. And so there's 2 or 3 acts like that, 2 or 3 things that have come out just very recently to show us that sensitization, even at the highest level, even the people who implement the law, is not there at all. But I also just want us to think about the men who do this harassment, right? So earlier I used to go to classes, and I go to every single class in my college, and I do this version of this talk that I have done with you all today. And I used to ask how many girls have been harassed, and almost every girl raises her hand. And then, but now what I do is I look at the boys and I say, how many of you are sexual harassers? And of course, that's a question that I don't expect an answer to. But I was recently doing a session where a boy said, how can you say that staring is sexual harassment? So I said, well, I said it's in the law. And he said, oh, but you know, the thing is that when I stare at girls, then girls usually don't know I'm staring at them. And the girls in the class shouted back at him. They said, we always know when we are being stared at. And then he looked at me and he said, does that mean I'm a sexual harasser? And I didn't have the heart to say anything to him, but the silence in the class basically confirmed that, yes, you are a sexual harasser. So I think for women also, because, how to say this? I think for every woman, every single day you get out of the house, you think to yourself, is today the day I'm going to get raped? And I'm saying it in this way that may seem exaggerated to you, but it's absolutely true. Even for us, I can see Rashmi and I can see Shobna on the screen in front of me, and I know that we are much older women. But even for us, if we step out of the house, we look at our kurta and we say, is it too transparent? Should I take a dupatta today? We pick up our car keys and we think, what time, if I'm going to be coming back late at night, do I need to worry? We keep our cell phones on our seats beside us all the time. I live in Gurgaon and I teach in North Campus, and very often I come back later at night. So if I'm at 7:30, I'm thinking to myself, if my car breaks down on the highway, I have to worry about everything that a man would have to worry about. I also have to worry about being raped. And I want to say to the men, when you tell your friends or your sister or anybody that I won't let you go alone in the taxi, I'll accompany you, what are you doing? You're saving her from being raped. When you tell her, don't go alone, I'll come with you at this time in the night, don't sit here, what are you doing? You're saving her from being raped. The only thing is that if we think about this consciously to ourselves, we'll go crazy. We won't be able to function anymore. And I want us to think of how completely insane patriarchy is. How completely crazy. There is not a single thing in patriarchy that is true or that is rational. Not a single one. Not one single. You can pick out anything from patriarchy that you think is rational, and if you think about it for 1 second, you will know that it is entirely irrational. In that way, it's insane. Something that's irrational is insane. So how does the act of staring, when a woman is being stared at, she thinks, thank God I'm not being touched. When she's being touched, she thinks, thank God I'm not being groped. When she's being groped, she says, at least I wasn't raped. So for a woman to say, I have been sexually harassed and complain about it takes a lot. And so this is just a very, very good question. I think that it hasn't percolated at all, not at all. And that is why we need to talk about it a lot.
Okay, ma'am, I totally agree with you. And I guess that we as the next generation can help in this problem. So with that, I would like to move ahead with the session. Thank you once again for answering the question and clearing the doubt of the attendees. This session was really enriching and energetic. I'm sure the attendees have gained a deeper perspective on this important topic. They must be very equipped to take a stand against such a heinous crime of sexual harassment. Our technical team has posted the feedback form in the chat box. I request all the attendees to fill the same for ensuring their e-certificates. With that, I would like to call Student President of Gender Sensitization Forum, SSE, Rudrani Datta, to present the vote of thanks. Over to you, Rudrani.
Thank you so much, Samiksha. On this occasion, I, Rudrani Datta, deem it a great privilege and honor to propose a vote of thanks on behalf of the entire team of Samvedna. After this enthralling session conducted by our esteemed guest speaker for the day, Dr. Vinita Chandra, I'm sure all our attendees and distinguished guests present over here have gained great insights. Firstly, I would like to extend my heartiest gratitude to Dr. Vinita for taking the time amidst her busy schedule to address our audience with her gargantuan insights on such a sensitive topic. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your time. I would now like to take the opportunity to thank Professor Manoj Khanna, Principal of Ramjas College, who encouraged the fruitful collaboration of both the forums. We are ever obliged to our principal, Professor Bipin Kumar Agarwal, for his eternal support and enthusiasm that fueled us to organize this event. Words are not enough to reciprocate the contribution of our society convener, Dr. Rashmi Mathur, who has rendered her support and guidance each time we embarked on a journey. I would also like to thank all the faculty coordinators of Samvedna, Dr. Vandana Bhalla, Mrs. Shobna Chandra, Dr. Anita Kumari, and Dr. Isha Ganwal for their valuable contribution for organizing this event. The cohesive efforts made by all the student members of Samvedna was noteworthy. I would also like to thank each and every member of Samvedna for their contribution to today's event. At last but not least, I thank all our attendees and distinguished guests for joining us today. Let us hope we can work towards making the society free from the instances of sexual harassment. Thank you all once again. I will now request Ria to continue with the further proceedings.
Thank you, Rudrani. All good things come to an end in life. So is the webinar. To capture this moment, I once again request everyone to kindly turn their cameras for a group photograph. Thank you everyone for joining in. Have a nice day.
Thanks, everyone. I just wanted to say that I would be happy to do question answers anytime later because we didn't have very much time for that. I think I spoke too long. But also we could perhaps have a session where we could have our students come together and have a conversation. And maybe we in Ramjas can also this time.
That will be more than welcome. Thank you so very much for the offer.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much, Dr. Chandra. It really was a very enlightening session. Very, very interesting and very, very innovative.
Yeah, let's hope to have such collaborations and we'll continue with such collaborations in future.
Yeah. I think Dr. Chandra has left.
I'm still here.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much. We probably will set up another session very soon where we will just have an interactive session with the students.
That's the most useful thing to do because I think, what I see, there's so many things that go so fast that I think the question answer is the most important part actually.
So I think it was a good first part. Initial, I think this was a good ice breaking session. So now we can have a follow-up session very soon where students can ask you questions.
And that would be great because I saw that a lot of Ramjas students are also here and it would be good for them to have a conversation with each other as well. So that would be nice.
Definitely have a follow-up session very soon.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Very much. So much. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Shall I end the meeting now?
Yes, Anita. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.